Thank you very much. I thank both.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the two lectures. The Israel Society for the Promotion of Classical Studies was founded in 1971. Therefore, this year marks its jubilee year. Jubilee, which is actually a word in European languages based on the Hebrew Yovel, which is the 50-year period. Over the past 50 years, the society, which let's say is the professional face of the classics establishment in Israel, has launched various projects and initiatives, but the two main things it does, and it does them regularly, are first of all, the International Conference, which, as I mentioned at the beginning of today, has been held every year except last year. So this is the 49th conference, not the 50th. And also it has published the Scripta Classica Israelica, of which the 40th volume has come out this year and is available today to all conference participants, either those who show up or would like their copy mailed to them. The breaks in publication and Scripta over the last 50 years have nothing to do with the pandemic. Together, the International Conference and the journal, Scripta, represent to some degree to the outside world the breadth and depth of what we do here, although of course what we do here as teachers and scholars is much greater. I'll give a report tomorrow in the meeting of the General Assembly on what turns out to have been a very productive year for classics in Israel given the difficult circumstances. But to give a more panoramic and informed view of the society as it completes its 50th year, we've asked a distinguished member of the society, our colleague Margalit Finkelberg, Professor Emerita of Classics in Tel Aviv University and former president of this society, to give what I imagine will be both a generic and a personal view of the Classic Society. Margalit has been in Israel and part of the Classics enterprise here for most of the existence of the Classic Society. She did her PhD in Classics at Hebrew University in 1986 and taught there before moving to Tel Aviv, which has been her academic home in Israel. She was chair of Classics here and, as I mentioned before, president of the society. I won't embarrass or bore her by going through all of the honors, but let me just say that during this time, she has made her mark on several fields of classics in an astonishing publication record ranging from Homer and epic tradition and other fields of poetics to Aegean scripts and languages and linguistics, myth, transmission and reception, textual criticism, morality and religion, and more. She's a member of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities, recipient of the Rothschild Prize in Humanities in 2012. All this makes her unusually qualified to reflect on the society in its 50th year. Margalit, please.
Thank you, Jonathan, for these kind words. Although I was not there from the beginning, more or less from the beginning, but not. Oh, thank you. So it will be a short address, but I hope quite substantial, nevertheless. Dear Professor Price, dear members of the Israel Society for the Promotion of Classical Studies, dear guests, it is a great honor for me to speak today before this forum, a great honor and a heavy responsibility, for I feel that I am also speaking for those who are not with us any longer, those whose vision, enthusiasm, and deep love for classical studies made this jubilee possible. It was indeed the founders, Professor Abraham Wasserstein of the Hebrew University, Professor Shalom Perelman of Tel Aviv, Professor David Solberg of Bar-Ilan, Professor Akiva Gilbo of the University of Haifa, and others, who 50 years ago conceived the idea of this society, gave it its particular form, and defined its rules. I hope they would be proud of us today. The Israel Society for the Promotion of Classical Studies was founded in 1971 as a high point of historical and cultural developments, which had brought about what I recently described elsewhere as a golden age of classical studies in Israel. This period of prosperity was a direct outcome of the cultural policy advanced in the decades that followed the foundation of the State of Israel. The young Jewish state strove to be on an equal footing with other nations by attaining normality, one of the cherished ideals of secular Zionism. This meant, among other things, providing the young generation with tools and opportunities for mastering the universal culture. As David Ben-Gurion put it in 1958, quote, "Perhaps I will look like a dreamer to you. I believe that we will be able to mobilize in Israel among the Jewish people the best literary and scientific minds, and that we will give to the nation all the good and important things of the literature of humankind." The idea gives me no rest for many years now. Since the establishment of the state, I felt that together with the state as such, we should also establish a state of spirit, Medinat Ruach in the Hebrew original. We have to give to the Hebrew generation, for Hebrew is their language, all the treasures of human spirit, since each of us is a citizen of the world. The higher education policy was inspired by the same vision. Dozens of talented graduates in all academic fields were dispatched to Europe and North America to continue their studies at the best universities. Classics was no exception. In the 1970s, a cohort of young classicists who had took their doctoral degrees abroad came back and joined the faculty of Israeli universities. Full programs in classical studies were now offered not only by the Hebrew University, whose Department of Greek Language and Literature, later the Department of Classics, was founded as early as 1928, but also by the Universities of Tel Aviv, 1956, and Bar-Ilan since 1970. Competent and dedicated teachers taught Greek and Latin to the students of classics and other disciplines. Scholars trained in classics were also employed at the departments of history, archaeology, Jewish studies, philosophy, linguistics, comparative literature, history of art, theater studies. The BA program of classics in translation, launched by the Tel Aviv Department of Classics, enjoyed wide popularity, and the importance of classical education was generally taken for granted. This was the historical and academic background against which scholars and students of the classical world from all over the country joined their efforts to found the Israel Society for the Promotion of Classical Studies. Professor Abraham Adi Wasserstein of the Hebrew University, 1921-1995, was elected as its first president. He was also the one who gave the society its name. Almost immediately, the meetings of the society became the central event of the life of the Israel classical community. 3 years later, in 1974, the first issue of the society's periodical Scripta Classica Israelica was published. Classical studies in Israel achieved a critical mass and became an equal partner on the international stage. I was hardly aware of all this when, in the late 1970s, I attended an ISPCS meeting for the first time. I was then a PhD student at the Hebrew University and had only recently graduated from the Ulpan. The meeting took place on the Bar-Ilan campus, I remember distinctly. I arrived from Jerusalem with a professor, then Dr. Ra'anana Meridor, with whom I was taking a seminar on Greek lyric poetry. She pushed me into the room full of strangers. It was the middle of the coffee break, and commanded in a fierce whisper, move around, Istovevi. I doubt that I made many contacts on that occasion. But although I think that this was the first time I met Hannah Cotton, but it's a different story. But the distant Bar-Ilan meeting was only the first in a long series of yearly encounters, which over the years brought me many friends and many happy memories. For each yearly meeting of the society is part of the recurring cycle punctuating the life of the classical community of Israel. From Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, from Tel Aviv to Bar-Ilan, from Bar-Ilan to Haifa, and later also to Beersheba, and still later yet to the Open University, and back to Jerusalem. In the course of the 50 years of its existence, the Israel Society for the Promotion of Classical Studies assumed many important roles and fulfilled numerous tasks. Its most significant achievement is, of course, the Scripta Classica Israelica, an academic journal of international standing, whose contributors include both the most illustrious international names and up-and-coming scholars. But the Scripta is also a chronicle of the life of the classical community here in Israel. From the dissertations in progress to the obituaries, which sadly have been appearing too frequently in recent years, the Scripta embraces the entire life cycle of the classical community, for better or for worse. No less importantly, the meetings of the society have provided a welcoming platform for generations of young scholars at the beginning of their academic careers. For many of those present, myself included, a talk at an ISPCS meeting was the first encounter with the quintessential academic experience of presenting one's work before the audience of colleagues and peers. The yearly meeting is also an unofficial job market, the pivotal moment at which a young scholar and his or her work are for the first time presented before the senior colleagues, subject to their assessment, and thus become visible. Furthermore, thanks to their international character, the society meetings also provide the Israeli classicists the opportunity to directly communicate with colleagues from all over the world, and through a keynote speaker program to attend live presentations by the most distinguished scholars in the field. I remember, for example, Kenneth Dover, it was many years ago, and of course Martin West and Fergus Miller. Sorry? Yeah. I mean those who are no longer with us, but le'avdil l'chayim. Eric Gruen, but it's not. This is not to say that we are in a position to paint too rosy a picture. Some successful past initiative notwithstanding, more could be done in such spheres as outreach or students' support. It should not be forgotten, however, that we are living in an increasingly challenging institutional environment. The number of academic positions in classics, ancient history, classical archaeology, and related fields has sharply decreased in recent years. I know that it was a good year, the last year, but if you look at the general picture, and this unfortunate development has found direct expression in the numbers of the registered members. We are fewer today than we used to be. Nevertheless, the president and the committee continue to do their best in order to fulfill their primary task of consolidating the classical community of Israel into a friendly, cohesive, and mutually cooperative whole. For above all, the Israel Society for the Promotion of Classical Studies is a warm and welcoming home, a tribal fire, Medorat Shevet, as it were, for the family of scholars and students of classical antiquity in Israel, and I am confident that it will remain the center of the life of the classical community in this country for years to come. Thank you very much. No questions, I hope. Да. Okay.
Thank you very much, Margalit. We share, first of all, thank you really for a moving and informative overview of our society, which is 50 years old this year. We share your hopes as well that it will continue, despite our declining numbers, to maintain our critical mass and keep the fire alive, as it were, of classical scholarship in all its dimensions and creativity here in Israel. It's not something that one can ask questions about. If someone feels the need to make a comment, the floor would be open. If not, I have some closing remarks. Anyway, thank you all for an interesting and exciting and worthwhile day today of papers. Tomorrow, we meet again at 9:30 in the morning here in Tel Aviv, or online if you want. The first session will be 4 papers in Hebrew. The Society's convention, Congress always has at least one session in Hebrew. So the 4 papers will be in Hebrew on the general topic of new developments in Hebrew scholarship, of Hebrew classical scholarship, of course. Then there will be the general meeting, also conducted in Hebrew, where we do our business. The keynote speaker this year is Sheila Mornigan from University of Pennsylvania, who at 2:15 Tel Aviv time will be giving a talk titled Return to Windy Troy, Sight and Text in the Homeric Tradition. And the last session of this conference will be at 3:15 on presenting 3 papers in English on local identities in global settings. So again, I thank you all. I'm going to turn off the Zoom, because now we just have local business. There's dinner here in Tel Aviv. If anyone wants to rush from Italy to have dinner, you have about 35 minutes. And goodbye. See you all tomorrow.